So let's move to another topic. And it's always brought up, especially by atheists, that the church is a staunch enemy of science. And it has been depicted in films such as Dan Brown's Angels and Demons. And of course, whenever this subject is brought up, Galileo is always part of the conversation. So what's the real deal with Galileo? So because in hindsight, did the church err here? And now that we know that the universe doesn't revolve around the earth, so what's the deal with Galileo?
Yeah, the deal with Galileo is again, to be brief and to sum it up about is that so again, I think that it's important to understand the historical context in which these events occurred, right? So many people we're just quick to kind of hear something or say, oh, the Inquisition killed millions of people. Oh, the Crusades were, unjust wars of bloodlust or whatever, and money
So
grabbing.
that's the theme here, the historical
Yeah.
context.
Yeah, the historical. I always stress that because I think it's incredibly important, right? We have to, you can't dismiss the time in which people live, and how they thought and how they believed. That's how you understand why certain things happen, right? So the historical context for Galileo is this is a time of great scientific advancement and achievement in all kinds of areas of study, right? In the physical sciences, and so you have, just many of these advances, I should say, or many of the research into these areas was done by churchmen, by ecclesiastics, by scientists, by Jesuits in particular, as you get into the 17th century, but. So first of all, the church is not opposed to science, right? That's the common myth. We can just dismiss that right now. St. John Paul II, in his encyclical Fides et Ratio, wrote in the prologue, in the very beginning of it, right? He said, faith and reason are like two wings upon which the human spirit rises to the contemplation of truth. Faith and reason, they're complementary. And what many people in the secular world do is they try to drive a wedge in between that and say, no, science and faith are opposed. And the church doesn't see that way. And it has never seen that way, frankly. However, there have been times, in the case of Galileo is one, where the church, perhaps, it's a combination of both. Galileo overstepped his bounds by trying to get the church to agree to his unproven scientifically, theory of cosmology, basically embracing the heliocentric theory of Copernicus. The sun is the center of the universe and not the earth. Whereas, so Galileo overstepped his bounds trying to get the church to agree to something that was outside of her competence, was a question of physical science, not metaphysics, if you will. And then the church, felt threatened and backed into a corner by Galileo pushing for the church to agree to this, because this is a time of the Protestant Revolution, right? This is a time where scriptural interpretation, the Protestants are saying the church doesn't have the proper interpretation of scripture. You don't need the church, you don't need any kind of magisterium or teaching authority to interpret or to guide, the understanding of scripture. You can do it yourself. And so that's the context in which the church lives. So here comes Galileo, and Galileo says, I agree with Copernicus and I have the proof for it. He didn't scientifically, right? The scientific proof for Copernicanism really didn't occur until the late 19th century with stellar parallax, but that's fine. It's a whole separate subject. But he tried to push the church to agree with him. And many theologians at the time, as well as, this is the other important point with Galileo, as well as most scientists at the time, secular scientists at the time, disagreed with the Copernican theory. They held to the Ptolemaic Aristotelian view of the world, where cosmology, where the earth was the center of the world, of the universe. And so it wasn't just the church that was against Galileo. His fellow scientists also disagreed with him vehemently on the subject. But Galileo pushed the church to accept it. And, the matter was brought before two inquisitions, Roman inquisitions, one in 1616, where it was believed that the heliocentric theory is not in conformity with, at the time, the accepted interpretation of certain passages of scripture, which seemed to point to about the truth of the Aristotelian Ptolemaic view. And so Galileo was told at that time, it was just the teachings that were under review, if you will. He himself wasn't at that time. He was told that he can continue to research this issue privately, but not teach it publicly. And he agreed with that injunction for a number of years. But in 1629, he then published a book, the Dialogue Concerning Two Chief World Systems, in which he publicly advocated for the heliocentric theory, putting himself at odds with that previous injunction from the Roman Inquisition. He was then once more brought before the Roman Inquisition, now much later, this time as in his 70s or close to his 70s, and was told, "Hey, you violated this injunction." And he said, "Yes, I did." And he offered to retract what he had published. He was given a light penance as a result of it. He was never tortured, although people think he was. Never tortured, never put in prison. Was placed under house arrest, and even the penance that he was asked to perform, which was a recitation of the penitential psalms, he asked and petitioned the Inquisition if his daughter, who was a nun, could say the penance for him, and that was granted. So he didn't even have to do the penance. His daughter did it as proxy for him, if you will. So he was not, this horribly abused martyr of intellectual freedom that he's usually held up to be. At all. Now, fast forward in the 20th century, St. John Paul II issued a commission, or established a commission, to look at this event, and they published a report in 1992, which you can find online and read. And in there, the commission indicated that the Roman Inquisition of 1616, when they made this judgment against the heliocentric theory, it was, as this report calls it, a subjective error in judgment. But they recognized that, again, dealing in the context of the time, it was an understandable decision, but it was an error in judgment. And so that's how we really, as Catholics, should see what happened here with Galileo.
And from what I read, Galileo's assertion is not completely correct as well, because he was saying that the sun is the center of the whole universe. Right. And as we know by now, that it's not. It's just the center of the solar system, right, but not the whole universe. Exactly. And this is the only example that anti-Catholics give when they say that the church is anti-science, and that's why I don't think it holds really that the church is anti-science.
For example, there are many a lot of craters on the moon, for example, are named after Jesuit priests, because they were the ones who took an interest in the telescope and astronomy and all of its advances, even at the time of Galileo. Some of his supporters actually were Jesuit scientists, and who tried to corroborate the things that he had observed. And so, it's just a the church is opposed to science is just, it's a lazy canard, if you will. It's a lazy attack on the church, because it of all the different events, clearly, all of them definitely are not true, but this is clearly one that is definitively, easily, kind of brushed away, if you will. But so many people believe it.
Yeah, and as we know, Father George Lemaitre is that the father of Big Bang, and is that Gregor Mendel, the father of genetics. Yep. So.
Hi, this is Jay Aruga of the Jay Aruga Show. If you like what you just saw, please consider subscribing and smash that like button. We'll need all of your help to take back the culture from this ideological colonization of the West. Thank you.